I think most preschools and maybe even kindergartens tend to still be pretty student-centered. There's a lot of play, there's a lot of inquiry, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of sort of student-driven learning and investigation in those environments. So if we could somehow carry the themes of early childhood and early elementary up into middle school and high school, we'd be much better off.
Hi, I'm Ron Sprunberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education. Scott, welcome to the Preschool podcast.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
So I want to start off our conversation by saying thank you. And the reason I'm saying thank you is for referring to our education system as P12 instead of K12, something that you don't see very often. And I think it's really great, that we're recognizing that education starts even earlier than kindergarten. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to focus the conversation quite a bit on the content of one of your books that you released recently called Different Schools for a Different World. And maybe you can just tell us briefly what that is all about.
Sure. So it's a short book. It's maybe 60 pages or so. That was really aimed not only at educators, but also parents, community members, school board members, boards of directors for preschools, whomever. It really sort of tries to outline how the contexts that surround schooling are changing so quickly and what that means for how schools themselves need to be different. So we make 6 key arguments within the book around why schools need to be different. One is around this idea that the ideas around information literacy are changing quite a bit. We make an economic workforce preparation argument. We talk about how there's new powerful learning opportunities that are available. We talk about how kids are bored out of their mind with the current model. We talk about how schools need to somehow be more innovative to keep up. And then we talk about equity issues. That's sort of the main thrust of the book. And then we end with some profiles of some different schools that seem to be a little further along the journey than most traditional schools. Cool.
So I think a lot of people can empathize with some of the points you've raised on your arguments. I think the challenging thing is probably more around what we do to get there, and maybe also you can tell us what it looks like to be different. You mentioned a couple case studies. Maybe we could hear one or two of those.
Yeah, well, I think, there's a lot of deeper learning schools across the world. There's probably several thousand now. And they really sort of focus on 4 big shifts that we outlined in the book. The first one is a shift from a focus primarily on low-level fact recall and procedural regurgitation to deeper learning or higher-level learning. Mm-hmm. The second shift is really around giving kids more agency and ownership of their own work, some more choice and voice, as some might say, which preschools tend to be pretty good at. Mm-hmm. Third thing is around how do we make schoolwork more authentic and connected to the real world rather than isolated and disconnected. And then the fourth big shift is around how do we use technologies in robust ways to make those first 3 things happen. And so most deeper learning schools are playing around with various elements of those 4 shifts. So they might be implementing project and inquiry-based learning. They might be implementing one-to-one computing initiatives. They might be looking at standards-based and competency-based grading, things like that.
Cool. So I think one of the things that really resonates with me about this stuff is, and you mentioned it, preschools are actually doing more of this stuff than the grade school level classes. And it's so amazing because, as early childhood educators know, we're so under-resourced. People don't get paid enough money. We don't have enough resources at our disposal. Yet what we're doing as early childhood educators is actually quite progressive in terms of educational models. Can you go into a little bit more detail on a couple of these points? And is there a specific program that you would like to talk about maybe that's doing these really well? Because I think to me the challenge is sort of what do you do, let's say, as a school administrator to create this type of learning environment?
Yes, absolutely. So, despite the accountability pressures that have been filtering down into younger ages, and the undesirability of many of those practices, and the developmental inappropriateness, I think most preschools and maybe even kindergartens tend to still be pretty student-centered. There's a lot of play, there's a lot of inquiry, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of sort of student-driven learning and investigation in those environments. And then what happens is that gradually, as students move up the grades, all that sort of seems to disappear, right? So that by the time they're in high school, they're mostly talked at, or they're reading passively in textbooks that they could care less about, or they're watching teacher-assigned YouTube videos on topics, again, that aren't of interest, whatever. And they actually have much less agency and inquiry and directedness of their own learning than they had when they were younger. So, if we could somehow carry the themes of early childhood and early elementary up into middle school and high school, we'd be much better off. And so, down at the preschool level, one of the most amazing schools that I visited was out in Los Angeles, called the Muse School. It's a private school, where at the beginning of the year, the walls are empty, right? And every single thing that goes up on the walls comes from the kids. And the students decide what the theme of the room is and what kind of charts and work management things they need up there. They give kids the choice of how they want to work at any given moment with a little clothespin, so they can take the little clothespin with their name on it, and they can say, I want to work with a buddy for the next hour and a half. I want to work in a small group. I want to work by myself, right? Like they're teaching them a lot of process communication model around how to effectively communicate with others, even at age 4. They get to identify the learning themes of the week with the teacher. So, a kid might be really interested in cats this week, and so they learn all their literacy and numeracy through the lens of cats. And it's just this wonderful student-centered place for pre-K through about 4th grade. Some of the schools that we're seeing up on the other end of the spectrum are doing the same kind of thing. They're trying to give students the opportunity to do their own investigations through Genius Hours, through long-term multi-week projects and inquiries, capstone projects, things like that, where we take that student interest-driven focus that seems to be much stronger at the younger grades and allow students at the upper grades to continue to find meaning and relevance in their work.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It makes so much sense, and it's something that I think everybody listening to the podcast would agree. But then there's also the other element of, what are the things that need to be in place for this to happen? And one of the things that you also talk about in your book that I'd like to touch on is crab bucket culture. Can you tell us a little
Sure.
bit more about what that means? Because I think at all educational levels, this is something that is a bit of a challenge as well.
Yeah, so, the biggest challenge for us around changing schooling is our mindsets about what schooling should look like. And unfortunately, schools have a lot of institutional inertia and a lot of sort of status quo thinking about this is what learning and teaching need to look like. And so what happens is that when an innovative teacher is ready to break out of that mold and do something different for kids, we unfortunately often see the rise of what we would call crab bucket cultures, right? Where in a crab bucket, whenever a crab tries to climb out, the other crabs grab it and pull it back down and keep it from getting out. And we see the same thing, unfortunately, with teachers, where we'll see a couple of innovative teachers who are trying to break the mold, and they very quickly face the scorn and, sort of withering comments and rebukes from other teachers in the building, either from jealousy or fear that they're going to be expected to do that too, or that sounds like too much work, or that seems too weird. Why can't you just do what we're doing? Whatever.
Yeah.
And so very quickly they get socialized out of the innovation, which means that in an era where we desperately need to be innovative, all of our most innovative teachers get pulled back down.
And what are some ways do you think that we can overcome that institutional inertia?
Yeah. Crab bucket cultures are tough, right? Because they're sort of informal cultures. And I think it really takes strong leadership at the building level to really emphasize the need for innovation and find ways for the innovators to win. Mm-hmm. And so over and over again in the leadership literature, it talks about how principals, heads of schools, directors, whatever, need to create cultures where we're actually rewarding and highlighting and fostering innovation rather than sort of allowing isolated pockets to hopefully flourish, but also unfortunately get pulled back down again. So it really takes strong leadership to attack those cultures head on and figure out how to break them apart.
Yeah, totally. Okay. One other thing I wanted to touch on is the idea of technology. So quite a bit of your work also revolves around this, and you're the founding director of the Advanced Study of Technology Leadership in Education, and obviously technology is a key part of any conversation where we're talking about innovation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role that you think technology plays in all of this?
Yes, absolutely. Technology is transforming all of society outside of schools and doing it quite rapidly. For schools and universities to sort of pretend that technology isn't going to dramatically impact what we do is sort of foolish. We can only stay in the bubble for so long. And the longer we try to stay in that bubble, the larger the relevance gap becomes between us and what our students and society need from us. So, the key for us is to figure out how do we use technology in thoughtful and meaningful ways. Unfortunately, we see a lot of schools throw technology into classrooms, but they don't really have a vision for how it should be used. They don't give teachers good professional development on innovative ways to use it in practice. They try to filter and block it down too tight so the kids can't really do anything with it. So, we sort of work against our own technology initiatives in many ways. But when you see kids doing amazing things with technology, and most of us have seen that with our children, our grandchildren, nieces and nephews, students, whomever, you're like, yeah, let's do more of this because this is really cool, right?
Yeah.
And what we have to realize is that those powerful learning opportunities are available to us. And the question is, how can we do more of that more often?
Yeah. And in order to do that, is there certain things that need to happen there as well from the teacher level and administration level?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think teachers really need to start taking some risks. When I have a elementary teacher say to me that her second graders know more about the iPad than she does as a 20-year veteran, and then laughs it off, and I'm thinking in my head, why aren't you embarrassed by that? Why aren't you embarrassed that the 7-year-olds know more about this technology than you? Somehow we have to figure out how to ramp up our own tech skills and knowledge. We have to figure out how to take risks with these things and try stuff. We have to be supported by our leadership. We have to have appropriate professional development supports and technical supports. There's sort of lots of moving parts to juggle here, but most of it has to do with teachers being willing to try things in the classroom. Now, a lot of teachers currently don't know even what some of the tools or possibilities could be, which is why I think the other necessity is that we have to get more teachers connected to innovative teachers in other buildings through online networks and online communities, so that, the very best way to get a kindergarten or preschool teacher to move, for example, is to connect her with other innovative preschool and kindergarten teachers in other places, and then she can see what they're doing and be like, ooh, I want that for my kids too. That's really awesome, right? And that will, being exposed to those other uses, will pull her towards a different kind of vision for her own. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I like.
Right, but right now, most teachers aren't connected in that way, which means they only have their local communities of practice. They don't have these global communities of practice that would really push them further.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I really like the perspective you take with technology being like a responsibility. It's a responsibility for you as a teacher to learn about technology and know how it can support you and your students in the classroom, as opposed to it's something that you can just sort of like, finish out your career and hope that, it's not going to get in the way too much or something like that.
Yeah, and I think we say in our book, there's no foreseeable future in which we go back to analog, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so we can't prepare kids for our past. We have to prepare kids for their present and their future. And all you got to do is look around and see that our information landscape is completely digital these days. Analog is fading fast. And yes, books are hanging on in certain genres like fiction and children's books. And yes, there's still a few newspapers floating around, right? But those models are slowly fading, right? And so you wouldn't bet money on those sectors. You would bet money on digital and online. And so we need to bet our energy and time and effort and attention on digital and online too in schools.
Yeah. One last question for you, because our audience
Sure.
is preschool, early childhood education focused. What's your feelings about that early years education and where they sit in this whole landscape of the work that you're doing?
I think in a broader sense, when you think of learning and teaching, we're already doing a lot of things right. We give kids a lot of opportunities to play, to have agency and ownership of their own learning, to investigate and inquire about things that they want to know. They get to ask lots of questions. Those are all good things. I think places where early childhood and early elementary could probably spend some more attention and energy are around getting beyond just the basic foundational facts and procedures that we want them to know. And those are important, right? But start to give even young kids opportunities to engage in critical thinking and problem solving around meaningful real world stuff. And then the other thing, of course, is that we always want a balance, right? We want kids playing in the sand, and we want them building with Legos, and we want them being creative with the, clothing areas and building areas in their rooms and all that stuff, right? But we also have to figure out how to insert technology into that in interesting ways, right? And maybe it's something simple like connecting your 4-year-old classroom to another 4-year-old classroom in another state, just so you can learn about things together. Maybe it's something where you actually start teaching kids how to do a little bit of video or a little bit of audio recording and share that with parents, right? You teach them how to take photos in creative ways, to capture and archive their work. I mean, there's things that we can do even at the earliest stages that are kind of fun. So lots of opportunities there, lots of tools are floating around for even the youngest kids to do that. We don't want them in front of screens all day, but we probably can be more thoughtful about when and how we use tech.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about balance, right? There's no perfect answer on one extreme. Yeah. And also for our listeners, just to reiterate Scott's point, you heard it here first. He said, if we took ECE principles and applied them to middle school, we'd be in a much better place. So you're doing a lot of things right.
Absolutely.
So that's great to hear. And also to extend on that, right? Like, early childhood education is doing a lot of amazing things, and we also have to make sure that we don't become a victim of this crab bucket culture. And if there's people doing amazing, innovative stuff, and if you're one of those people, get the word out there about all the amazing things you're doing and get on one of these online communities to share, because there's other people like you and other people that want to learn about the stuff you're doing. So that's really some really great points from Scott there. Scott, if I'm listening to the podcast, I want to get in touch with you or learn more about your work. Where's the best place for me to go?
Sure. So my blog is Dangerously Irrelevant, and it's just dangerouslyirrelevant.org. My book is on Amazon at Different Schools for a Different World. You can find me on Twitter at McLeod, MCLEOD, and lots of other online spaces, but those are the main ones.
Awesome, Scott. Thanks for the work that you're doing, and thanks for coming on the Preschool Podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
If you enjoyed our conversation, don't forget to subscribe for more episodes and leave a review. The Preschool Podcast is brought to you by Hi Mama. If you're anything like the thousands of teachers listening to the Preschool Podcast, You know how long it takes to fill out daily sheets, child portfolios, and lesson plans. And that's where Hi Mama saves the day. With an easy-to-use interface built by teachers for teachers, Hi Mama can cut the time you spend on documentation and parent engagement in half. Create and send beautiful daily sheets, photos, videos, and messages to parents in seconds, saving you time in your busy day. Podcast listeners can get a free tour with one of our community advisors. Go to